At 65, Jim McMahon sits with a gaze both defiant and tired. The wild child of the 1980s Bears dynasty has carried scars that no trophy could erase. His words today feel less like nostalgia and more like confession. The man once known for sunglasses, headbands, and rebellion has chosen to tell the truths he once buried deep. Jim McMahon was never just a quarterback. He was a symbol of chaos in a league obsessed with order. He mocked authority, challenged coaches, and refused to bend to owners. On the field, he was fearless, a gambler with a rocket arm and a street fighter's spirit. Off the field, he was a lightning rod for controversy, embodying both charisma and destruction. Now, decades removed from his final snap, McMahon looks back on the grudges that shaped him. He speaks of rivalries that never faded, betrayals that still sting, and the hidden truths that defined his career. These are not stories of statistics or highlight reels. They are the dark undercurrents of ego, power, and survival. Why did McMahon, a Super Bowl champion, carry so much anger toward those around him? What secrets lay behind his strained relationships with teammates, coaches, and the league itself? And why, after all these years, does he still refuse to forgive? This is not just the story of a quarterback. It is the story of a man who lived by rebellion, thrived in chaos, and left the game with truths that could no longer be silenced. Jim McMahon was born in 1959 in Jersey City, New Jersey. But his family soon moved to San Jose, California. There, his restless spirit began to show early. He was a boy who refused silence, a kid who tested rules. By high school, football gave him a stage. His arm was sharp, his vision daring, and his confidence unshakable. Coaches saw both talent and trouble, a duality that would follow him for life. At Brigham Young University, McMahon's legend took form. He shattered records with fearless passing, orchestrating comebacks that defied logic. Yet even there, clashes brewed. A conservative campus met his irreverent humor and rebellious style. He was brilliant on the field, but restless off it, refusing to conform to the buttoned-down expectations of the institution. This tension between authority and freedom would define him. Drafted 5th overall in 1982 by the Chicago Bears, McMahon entered a franchise desperate for salvation. Chicago craved a quarterback with swagger, someone who could revive a proud but stagnant team. McMahon delivered both hope and headaches. He could read defenses in seconds, then improvise chaos that left opponents stunned. But he also wore headbands with political slogans, mocked league policies, and spoke bluntly in press conferences. He was both the face of victory and the source of controversy. Under coach Mike Ditka, McMahon's battles found their fiercest arena. Ditka demanded discipline and control. McMahon demanded freedom. Their relationship was a storm of respect and fury, two alphas colliding under the harsh lights of Soldier Field. The tension electrified Chicago. Fans loved the drama, but inside the locker room, fractures formed. The mid-1980s, Bears became a cultural phenomenon, capped by their crushing victory in Super Bowl 20. Yet beneath the celebration, McMahon's story darkened. Injuries mounted, league officials criticized his antics, and owners grew weary of his defiance. He was labeled reckless, undisciplined, a man unwilling to play the game by corporate rules. Still, McMahon's persona captured America. He was a quarterback who looked more like a rock star, sunglasses hiding the pain, smirks hiding deeper scars. He represented grit against glamour, rebellion against order, individuality against the machine of the NFL. His career was not measured by numbers but by defiance, by the moments he turned football into theater. Now, years later, the truth is clearer. McMahon's career was forged in conflict. Every success shadowed by resistance. Every victory etched with grudges. To understand his hidden truths, one must understand the wars he fought, not just against opponents, but against the very system that tried to control him. His story is not a celebration of smooth triumph. It is a mosaic of chaos, betrayal, and survival. For many fans, Mike Ditka and Jim McMahon looked like the perfect pairing. Both were fiery, both were outspoken, and both embodied Chicago's working-class grit. Yet behind the myth of unity, there was constant war. Ditka demanded order. McMahon demanded freedom. The clash was inevitable. Ditka had been a hard-nosed tight end in his playing days. As coach, He carried that same old-school discipline. He believed in rules, structure, and hierarchy. Players followed the chain of command, or they faced his wrath. McMahon was the opposite. He thrived in improvisation, fueled by instinct, and laughed at authority. He hated being told to sit still, hated being silenced. Their differences were more than tactical, they were philosophical. The origins of their conflict appeared in McMahon's rookie season. Ditka wanted his quarterback to learn quietly, wait his turn, and earn respect. McMahon believed he was ready now. He challenged teammates in practice, barked back at coaches, and demanded the spotlight. Ditka called him reckless. McMahon called him stubborn. The air between them thickened with each exchange. The most symbolic eruption came in 1985, the year the Bears stormed the NFL. Chicago was winning, but McMahon and Ditka were constantly at odds. McMahon would audible out of plays, improvising passes that angered his coach yet thrilled the crowd. Ditka would explode on the sideline, screaming, gesturing, veins bulging in frustration. Cameras caught the chaos, turning their battles into public theater. One iconic moment burned itself into Bears lore. In a game against the Minnesota Vikings, McMahon had been benched due to injury. Ditka insisted he should not play. Yet with the Bears struggling, McMahon grabbed his helmet, stormed onto the field, and fired 3 touchdown passes. The stadium roared. Chicago loved the rebellion. But Ditka seethed. His authority had been undermined on national television. McMahon's defiance had embarrassed him, even as it delivered victory. This tension defined their partnership. They were united by success, divided by control. McMahon respected Ditka's toughness, even admired his fire, but he could not accept the leash. Ditka, meanwhile, valued McMahon's talent but never trusted his independence. Their relationship was less mentor and student, more rivals trapped in the same cage. The Super Bowl 20 victory temporarily masked the fractures. Chicago dominated, McMahon played brilliantly, and Ditka basked in glory. Yet once the confetti cleared, the bitterness remained. Injuries sidelined McMahon in later years, and Ditka grew increasingly impatient. He questioned McMahon's commitment, mocked his antics, and hinted the Bears needed discipline more than swagger. McMahon, in turn, mocked Ditka's rigidity, claiming the coach never understood quarterbacks. Even decades later, McMahon rarely softens his words. He has admitted that while he respected Ditka as a man, their relationship was never warm. He felt Ditka never trusted him fully, never gave him the freedom he needed. To McMahon, Ditka symbolized the system he spent his career rebelling against. The cold truth is this: Jim McMahon never forgave the battles with his coach. The wins were real, the glory undeniable, but the scars remained. In his memory, Mike Ditka was not the mentor fans believed. He was the adversary who constantly tried to break his spirit. And McMahon never forgot. If Jim McMahon was the rebel, Pete Rozelle was the law. As commissioner of the NFL, from 1960 to 1989, Rozelle embodied the league's authority. He was polished, corporate, and deeply protective of the NFL's image. McMahon, with his headbands and biting sarcasm, represented the exact opposite. Their collision was inevitable. Rozelle believed the NFL should project unity, discipline, and respectability. McMahon mocked those very principles. He showed up to games in sunglasses, cracked jokes about officials, and wore headbands with slogans. One infamous moment came during the 1985 playoffs when McMahon scrawled Rozelle on his headband in black letters. The crowd roared. Cameras zoomed in. It was pure theater. But to Rozelle, it was a public insult, a shot at his authority in front of millions. The story behind the headband was classic McMahon. Earlier, the league had fined him for wearing a band with an unapproved brand logo. So, in defiance, he scribbled the commissioner's name across his forehead. He turned punishment into comedy, mocking the league's obsession with control. It was rebellion in plain sight. And it embarrassed Rozelle. Rozelle's office was not amused. McMahon was fined repeatedly for uniform violations, media comments, and conduct deemed unprofessional. Each fine fed his defiance. He called the commissioner a dictator, accusing him of caring more about corporate image than players. Rozelle, in turn, viewed McMahon as a threat to the NFL's carefully crafted brand. He wanted stars who smiled for cameras, not ones who spit fire at authority. The clash went beyond headbands and soundbites. It was about philosophy. Rozelle saw the NFL as a product to be marketed to families and sponsors. McMahon saw football as raw competition, a stage for personality and rebellion. To him, Rozelle's rules strangled authenticity. To Rozelle, McMahon's antics risked damaging the billion-dollar empire. The most symbolic clash came before Super Bowl 20. Reporters swarmed McMahon, eager for quotes. True to form, he joked crudely, cursed, and made headlines with his blunt humor. Rozelle's office panicked, fearing the quarterback would overshadow the league's showcase. Rumors swirled that Rozelle wanted McMahon muzzled. McMahon, of course, refused to be quiet. His antics only grew louder, cementing his reputation as the NFL's outlaw. Even years later, McMahon never softened his stance. In interviews, he dismissed Rozelle as a suit who cared little for players' struggles. He felt targeted, punished not for crimes but for refusing to conform. He viewed Rozelle as the face of corporate control, the man who tried to cage his spirit. Fans loved McMahon's defiance. The headband with Rozelle became an icon of rebellion, a symbol of player versus league. But behind the laughs was bitterness. McMahon believed the NFL cared more about image than humanity, more about discipline than freedom. Rozelle's crusade to silence him left scars that outlasted his career. The cold truth: McMahon never forgave Pete Rozelle. To him, the commissioner was not a guardian of the game, but the embodiment of control he spent his life resisting. The headband was more than a joke, it was a declaration of war. Every quarterback finds a rival that defines him. For Jim McMahon, it was the Green Bay Packers. The Bears-Packers rivalry was already one of the NFL's most historic battles. A war fought in icy winds and bitter traditions. But in the 1980s, with McMahon at the helm of Chicago, the hatred reached volcanic heat. Green Bay was everything McMahon loved to despise. They were disciplined, conservative, and proud of their legacy. To McMahon, they symbolized authority wrapped in green and gold. Every matchup was more than a game. It was a street fight with history watching. His headbands, his bravado, his trash talk, all burned brighter when the Packers lined up across the field. The roots of his animosity were both personal and brutal. In 1986, the Packers delivered a hit that would haunt McMahon's career. Defensive tackle Charles Martin infamously body-slammed him into the turf after an interception. The act was vicious, late, and deliberate. McMahon's shoulder was wrecked. His season effectively ended. The Bears were Super Bowl champions the year before, poised for another run, but that one dirty play shattered their hopes. The incident became one of the most infamous moments in the rivalry. Martin had worn a towel with numbers of Bears players he intended to target, like a hit list. McMahon's number was there. When the slam came, it was not just a tackle. It was an ambush. McMahon writhed in pain. Fans gasped. Teammates erupted in fury. But the damage was done. His body would never fully recover. For McMahon, that hit was not just about injury. It was betrayal. It confirmed his belief that the league failed to protect players like him, that opponents could destroy careers without true justice. Charles Martin was suspended, but the punishment felt hollow compared to the wreckage left behind. McMahon carried the bitterness long after his shoulder healed. To him, the Packers were not rivals. They were enemies who had tried to break him. The games that followed only deepened the hostility. Each time McMahon faced Green Bay, he played with extra venom, his eyes narrowed behind his visor, his throws sharper, his swagger louder. He mocked their fans, taunted their defense, and turned every clash into a grudge match. Chicago fans adored it, feeding on his hatred like fuel. The rivalry became personal, his anger woven into the city's identity. Years later, when reflecting on his career, McMahon never softened his words. The Packers, he admitted, represented the darkest side of football for him. They were the team that stole his health, the rival that left scars on his body and his legacy. He acknowledged the rivalry's historic place in NFL lore. But for him, it was no celebration. It was pain, betrayal, and unfinished war. The cold truth: Jim McMahon never forgave the Packers for that day in 1986. The hit by Charles Martin was more than a foul. It was a defining moment of violence that robbed him of greatness, and in his heart, the bitterness never died. Jim McMahon was the face of the Bears in the mid-1980s. He gave the franchise swagger, turned Soldier Field into a theater, and brought Chicago its first Super Bowl championship since the days of George Halas. Yet behind the glory, McMahon carried a bitter truth. He never trusted the Bears' ownership. He believed they failed him, failed to protect him, and ultimately failed to stand by the quarterback who gave them everything. Ownership in Chicago was represented by the Halas-McCaskey family. They were proud, traditional, and deeply tied to the legacy of Papa Bear George Halas. They valued loyalty, discipline, and control. McMahon, with his rebellious streak, was always a difficult fit. Yet even more than clashing personalities, the issue ran deeper. McMahon felt that when his body was targeted, when his health was shattered, the Bears' hierarchy stayed silent. The Charles Martin incident against the Packers in 1986 was the breaking point. McMahon was slammed illegally into the turf, his shoulder mangled. The Bears' hopes of repeating as champions died that day. McMahon expected his franchise to erupt in his defense, to pressure the league for justice, to demand stronger protection. Instead, he felt they accepted the punishment as business as usual. A suspension for Martin, a shrug from the league office, and quiet compliance from the Bears' top brass. For McMahon, the silence was betrayal. He believed ownership cared more about the shield of the NFL than the health of its players. He saw them as corporate stewards, unwilling to challenge authority, unwilling to stand beside their own warrior. He was their quarterback, their Super Bowl hero. Yet when his career was altered by violence, he felt abandoned. The bitterness grew as injuries mounted. McMahon battled concussions, shoulder problems, and chronic pain. He sought medical help, demanded care, but often felt dismissed. Years later, he would reveal his struggles with memory loss and debilitating headaches, symptoms tied to the countless hits he absorbed. In his eyes, the Bears organization failed to protect him not only on the field but off it. They failed to safeguard his future. This resentment lingered long after he left Chicago. In interviews, McMahon openly criticized the McCaskeys, accusing them of caring more about image than humanity. He claimed they treated players like disposable pieces, celebrated in victory but discarded in injury. His words carried weight, because they were not from a bitter bench warmer, but from the quarterback who delivered their only Super Bowl glory in decades. Fans still debated whether McMahon was fair in his accusations. Some argued he was reckless, that his improvisational style made him vulnerable. Others pointed to the era itself, when player safety was a distant thought. But for McMahon, those defenses never mattered. In his heart, he believed ownership failed him when he needed them most. The cold truth: Jim McMahon never forgave the Bears' ownership. To him, they were not guardians of a proud franchise. They were the silent power that watched him fall and chose not to fight. His legacy in Chicago remains iconic, but behind the banners and cheers lies a scar of betrayal that time could never erase. For Jim McMahon, rivals came in many forms. Coaches who tried to control him, opponents who tried to break him, owners who stayed silent. But above them all stood one entity larger than any individual: the National Football League itself. To McMahon, the league was not just a governing body. It was a machine, relentless and indifferent, that chewed him up and left him broken. From the beginning, McMahon clashed with its rules. The NFL demanded clean image, corporate smiles, and obedience to authority. McMahon gave it sarcasm, rebellion, and defiance. He wore headbands with slogans, mocked officials in interviews, and spoke openly about hypocrisy in the system. The league fined him again and again, yet each fine only fueled his fire. For McMahon, every paycheck taken was proof that the league wanted silence, not authenticity. But the deeper conflict was not about headbands or press conferences. It was about health. McMahon absorbed brutal punishment during his career. Concussions blurred his vision. His shoulder never truly healed. His body was wrecked, yet he kept playing. He trusted that the league, with its wealth and power, would protect its warriors. Instead, he believed it abandoned them. In later years, McMahon described memory lapses, depression, and unbearable pain. He spoke of days when he forgot where he was, when the fog of head trauma consumed him. And he made it clear: he blamed the NFL for ignoring the cost of glory. The most searing moment came years after retirement. When McMahon joined lawsuits against the league over concussion protocols, he revealed stories of untreated injuries, of pressure to return to games before healing, of doctors who downplayed risks. The league denied wrongdoing, But for McMahon, the truth was clear. The NFL protected its brand, not its players. His suffering was not accidental. It was systemic. Symbolic of his rage was his open disdain for the commissioner's office long after Rozelle retired. Whether it was Paul Tagliabue or Roger Goodell, McMahon saw them all as faces of the same machine, smooth voices who spoke of safety while bodies piled up in silence. He compared the NFL to a corporation that sold violence for billions, then walked away from those who delivered it. Fans adored McMahon for his honesty. When he spoke about his pain, it was not polished rhetoric. It was raw, angry, human. He admitted he would sometimes consider leaving this world, the suffering too much. But he also revealed how treatment and awareness gave him moments of relief. In those confessions, fans saw not a reckless rebel, but a man bearing the true cost of football's golden age. For McMahon, the NFL was not an enemy in the sense of one man. It was bigger, colder, faceless. It was the system that celebrated him on Sunday and forgot him on Monday. The grudge he carried against it was not about one incident. It was about decades of neglect, an entire culture that prized spectacle over humanity. The cold truth. Jim McMahon never forgave the league that defined him. He gave it everything: his body, his mind, his spirit. In return, he believed it left him broken. To him, the NFL was not just football. It was betrayal. Not every grudge in Jim McMahon's story came from an enemy. Some came from those he once considered allies. Buddy Ryan, the defensive mastermind of the Bears, was one of them. Ryan adored toughness, respected rebellion, and built the ferocious defense that carried Chicago to glory. For a time, McMahon admired him, even saw him as the one coach who understood the Warriors' spirit. But success bred division. The 1985 Bears became two teams in one: Buddy Ryan's defense and Mike Ditka's offense. McMahon often found himself caught in the crossfire. He respected Ryan's fire, but the split poisoned the locker room. Ryan's unit mocked the offense, treating McMahon like a sideshow. For a quarterback desperate for trust, the lack of unity cut deep. When Ryan left Chicago to coach the Philadelphia Eagles, McMahon felt the shift like a betrayal. The man he once admired walked away, leaving behind fractures that never healed. Later, when the Eagles' defense brutalized him in games, the irony was not lost. The coach who once stood beside him had built a new machine that punished him without mercy. Years later, McMahon admitted he still carried bitterness. Buddy Ryan, in his eyes, represented the reality that loyalty in the NFL was always fragile. Even allies could become architects of pain. The cold truth. Jim McMahon never fully forgave Buddy Ryan. He respected him, yes, but in his memory, Ryan symbolized another lesson of survival in football. Even friends could turn into ghosts that haunted him long after the cheers were gone. Jim McMahon's career is remembered in snapshots. A headband with defiant words, a sideline smirk beneath dark sunglasses, a fearless pass released while defenders closed in, a body slammed into the turf by the Packers, a quarterback hoisted on the shoulders of Chicago fans, after the greatest Super Bowl in the city's history. These images endure because they capture not just a player, but a man who lived in defiance of the world around him. The rivalries and grudges that shaped McMahon's journey were not isolated moments. They were the threads that formed his entire legacy. With Mike Ditka, he embodied the eternal struggle of freedom versus control. Ditka wanted order, a quarterback on a leash. McMahon wanted chaos, a gunslinger with no chains. Their battles became theater, proof that greatness often emerges from conflict rather than harmony. With Pete Rozelle, McMahon's fight became larger than football. He mocked authority with a headband, turning defiance into spectacle. It was more than a joke. It was a declaration that players were not just corporate pawns. His rebellion resonated with fans who saw in him a symbol of individuality against a machine. The Packers defined his physical scars. That single hit in 1986 changed his body forever. It stripped Chicago of a dynasty and forced McMahon to play with pain that would follow him for life. The bitterness he carried toward Green Bay was not pettiness. It was survival instinct. They had robbed him of years, perhaps even a Hall of Fame path. His anger toward Bears ownership revealed another truth. Loyalty in the NFL was conditional. McMahon believed that when he needed protection most, silence reigned. He gave Chicago its most glorious moment, yet he felt discarded once his body was broken. The distrust never faded, and finally his feud with the NFL itself became the centerpiece of his legacy. McMahon stood as living evidence of the league's cost. His battles with memory loss, depression, and physical pain became a mirror of what football demanded from its stars. He was not just the punky quarterback who won a Super Bowl. He was the man who bore the hidden price of the game. Together, these truths form a mosaic. They reveal a legacy not polished by numbers, but carved by conflict. McMahon was not Dan Marino with perfect spirals, nor Joe Montana with icy precision. He was something different. He was rebellion in pads. He was chaos under center. He was the quarterback who played football as though it were war in the streets, raw and unpredictable. Even now, decades later, fans remember him not for his statistics, but for his spirit. They recall the way he taunted Green Bay, the way he stood up to Rozelle, the way he clashed with Ditka on the sidelines. They remember the man who made the NFL uncomfortable, who refused to be molded into its corporate image. McMahon's story is the reminder that football legends are not shaped by perfection. They are forged in conflict, scarred by betrayal, and defined by the truths they refuse to bury. For him, the grudges were not distractions. They were the very fuel that made him unforgettable. Beyond the trophies, beyond the highlight reels, beyond the cheers of 1985, it was the grudges, the betrayals, and the dark truths that defined Jim McMahon. His legacy is not just victory. It is survival against the system, rebellion against control, and a voice that refuses to fade. When history recalls the Bears' only Super Bowl champion quarterback, the truth must include the chaos he carried. For Jim McMahon, the legend is not in what he won, but in what he endured. His story is not neat, not polished, but it is unforgettable. The story of Jim McMahon is not just about touchdowns or trophies. It is about rebellion, survival, and the hidden truths that defined an era. He clashed with coaches, mocked commissioners, battled bitter rivals, and carried grudges against ownership and the league itself. Each conflict left scars, but each also revealed the man beneath the helmet. Now the question falls to you. Which of these truths shocked you the most? Was it the brutal hit from the Packers that altered his destiny? Was it the silent betrayal of Bears ownership that still lingers decades later? Or was it his war with the NFL itself, the machine that both made him and broke him? These are not just memories of the 1980s. They are reflections of what football was and what it cost. McMahon's story forces us to ask, how much do legends sacrifice for our cheers, and how much of that sacrifice is forgotten once the lights fade? We invite you to join the conversation. Share your thoughts in the comments. Was McMahon right to never forgive? Or did his grudges keep him from peace? If you found meaning in uncovering these hidden truths, make sure you subscribe to NFL Hidden Truths. Here, we bring you the untold stories of football's golden age, the legends who shaped the game, and the darker realities that history tried to hide. Because beyond the trophies and the glory, it is the secrets, the rivalries, and the battles that reveal the true heart of the game. And Jim McMahon's story is proof that legends are not just remembered for what they won, but for the truths they carried until the very end.